Why are cities important? And why should we care about getting city regions right? Watch the Urban Q to know what it takes to shape a city that works for all. Hello everyone. Today we are in conversation with Shashi Verma. Shashi is the Chief Technology Officer at Transport for London. During his early days at TfL, Shashi established the corporate finance team and led the development of Crossrail, a £16 billion project to build the next railway line in London. Shashi was responsible for many innovations within the TfL setup and is an internationally regarded expert who orchestrated the transformation of London's well-known and often quoted mobility system. In fact, TfL Systems contactless payments remain the most successful fintech innovation anywhere in the world. Under his leadership, the technology delivery of TfL continues to see many advancements. So we're here today to talk about cities, people, and how do we get to and plan for people-centered, high-functioning urban areas. Welcome, Shashi. It is an honor and a pleasure to have you on our podcast, The Urban Q.
I'm so glad to be here, Jaya.
So, Shashi, we'll start with a warm-up question, basically to get a sense of, what does a city represent to you, and which is your favorite city in the world?
Well, Jaya, cities have been around for 10,000 years. And if you look at them, cities have come and gone. There are urban civilizations that have collapsed. We know about them. But there is one thing in common between all cities. Cities exist for only one purpose, which is that they allow economic activity to organize itself more productively than spreading it around. That is the fundamental purpose for which cities have been around, and that's been a constant for 10,000 years. So to me, cities are a living organism that allow us humans to live in proximity with each other and be more productive. That is why, despite all the challenges of living in cities, people have been congregating towards cities for so long. And the real challenge of cities is to reduce the hassle, reduce the challenge of living in cities, and thereby provide the platform that allows cities to become more productive. I have to say, on that count, London remains my favorite city all through. I think what we've achieved for a city of this scale in terms of the quality of life and the improvements we've been able to make, and just how you can live your life hassle-free in the city, is something that has been a real achievement. So London remains by far my favorite city in the world.
Absolutely. And I think many people would agree with you, and they would cite London. I hear that often in my circle that, London is their favorite city to be. So, I think a large part of it is also how you move around, how people interact with the city. And I think, urban mobility must be quick, clean, and cost effective, making it a particularly complex challenge, though. So when you joined Transport for London, what was your vision for the city, and what was your first sort of big challenge to solve for?
Well, Jaya, I think I have to acknowledge that a lot of good developments in London were happening as a result of work that started in the 1980s, and this long before I had even thought of living in London. And the long history here is that London has been a successful city for many centuries. In fact, it's very rare as a city that's been successful for so long. But it was in decline in the 1960s and 70s. And that decline was arrested in the late 1980s with a lot of new developments happening. But that stream of thought is what created Transport for London. So there was already a thought process about an integrated transport system. And the mayor of London, who was elected in 2000, Ken Livingstone, who was an old hand, consummate London politician, had a very grand vision for London. I think our task in TfL, and I was very much a leading part of it, was to enhance that ambition even further, and to really put flesh on the bones of this ambition to be the leading global city. So it was very clear that we didn't just want to be a leading global city. We wanted to be the best.
Yeah.
And my role, including the work that I did on Crossrail, which I'm sure we'll talk about a bit more, was very much about bringing the crispness of thinking, the really sharp thinking about what it would take to be competitive globally. And if I look back at everything that TfL has done for the last 23 years of its existence, that stream of thought about making the city competitive globally and making life in London better has been at the core of our thinking.
That's fantastic. And you mentioned Crossrail, and of course, that was one of the sort of cornerstones, a project that you were deeply engaged in, that you pretty much, conceptualized and you've taken through. And the work on Crossrail almost demonstrated a new theory of agglomeration economics, according to which the economic benefits of Crossrail or any transport system can go beyond just the transportation impacts of time and cost saved to overall regional economic productivity. So how did that come to be? Was it by design that you thought of doing it this way?
Well, I came to Transport for London without a huge amount of background in transport. Many people come to transport after having studied transport planning or transport economics. I had none of that, right? So I had studied economics. My master's and PhD was very economics focused at Harvard. So it's not like I was uneducated in economics, but I had never focused on transport economics. So when I joined TFL, we had a long suite of projects, and I was working on many of them, but I gravitated very quickly towards Crossrail. The question that was front of my mind was the traditional way in which transport investment is justified worldwide, but very particularly in the UK, is on the basis of a business case that's based on fundamentally on time savings. You compute the time savings from investment, you attribute a value to the time that's saved, that becomes the benefit, you divide it by the cost, you get a benefit cost ratio, and that's the method of justifying transport investment.
Right.
The problem with that method is that it has very rich economic pedigree, but it has no political appeal. Telling a finance minister or a prime minister, a transport business case, we've ended up with a benefit cost ratio of 2 to 1 or whatever it is, please can I have 16 billion pounds, is not something that washes when finance ministers are also considering investment in other things that are very visible and that have very clear outcomes. When the choice is between investing in schools and hospitals and transport, you have to bring the benefits of transport to life in a way that appeals to the people who have to make decisions.
Right.
So the very clear question was that despite the economic pedigree, what is it that links transport to economic value? So I went back to all the economic history around how transport appraisals had come to be based on time savings, and it goes back to the 1950s with the work done by Michael Beasley and Chris Foster, which is very high quality work, and that's the basis of everything. But the question they were asked was different. It wasn't about what economic value transport creates. It was a method of ranking transport projects. So that got me thinking about, how do we link this more directly to value? And that's where the whole idea that I started this discussion with came up, which is cities exist only because they enable productivity. If that was not the case, people would live in much larger houses with much cleaner air, with much less hassle, spread across the entire country. Right? So, having understood that that is the fundamental reason why cities exist, and having seen the data about how much more productive cities are, the question was, what role does transport play in this? Now, the beautiful thing about London is that in the history of urbanization, London plays a very interesting role because London's growth was entirely based on transport. London really started to grow in the early 19th century on the back of railways. So, the link could be made more easily here. And that was the genesis of the idea of agglomeration theory. Now, we went much further. We did theoretical work. Some was done by us in TFL, some was done by academics. And then the theoretical work was quantified with econometric analysis. That became the basis of justifying Crossrail. And it has become the standard way in which transport appraisal now gets done.
That's very interesting, Shashi, and you're saying that's the way transport appraisal gets done. And you've talked about the political salience of why this makes sort of more sense, and when people have to strategize and think about what projects to kind of bring forth and prioritize in their cities, and dollars are stretched, they are limited. How do they kind of attribute priority to those projects? Do you think that's happening across other cities in the globe? Do you think this kind of method and this methodology of, kind of assessing transport methods has kind of caught on in other places as well?
Well, there's some movement on that front, but the reality is not enough.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just a question of whether people are using the right appraisal methods. It's the underlying thinking about what transport is there to do.
Right.
Right. The underlying thinking of the real link between life in a city and the role that transport can play in enhancing or not enhancing it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is the real question, in which the appraisal method is a very technical way of bringing to life what is a much bigger philosophical and strategic issue.
Right.
It's not happening enough. I don't see much evidence of it happening in the developing world in particular, where, frankly, the need to think this through is most acute because that's where the bulk of the growth is happening.
Absolutely. And, on that point, Shashi, can you share some insights or, ways in which this can happen more, and also including from early failures? And it would be interesting if there were any that you learned from, especially during implementation, that could help Indian cities, for example, advance and think about transportation differently than they do now.
Well, if you think of Indian cities, and by the way, this is not unique to Indian cities, this is happening across the developing world. Start by asking the question, what is the model of development that we are following, right? Is productivity even a factor in any of it? It looks to me that a lot of the thinking is based on decongestion, that, there are congested corridors and, we should put metros in place because that would take the traffic away from the roads. Now, I may be oversimplifying, but that is the impression that comes out from all the investment that is going on. Now, at one level, if you think of it, Delhi being an example, with all this investment, congestion is even worse. Right? Now, you could take the counter view that had the investment not been there, the congestion would have been even worse.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact is that we have not solved the congestion problem by investing in public transport. So clearly, solving congestion was not the issue. Right? The issue is something else. And nobody, to my knowledge, has seriously sat down and said, well, what is that something else that we're trying to solve for?
Right.
The fact is that something else is growth. It's growth because cities are under pressure with more people coming to live in cities. That's a real issue. But this is where the crux of the agglomeration theory comes in. Growth can either lead to productivity if you're clever about it, or it can destroy productivity if you're not clever about it. Right. And that's where the thinking is completely missing.
No, and we often find, I think also in our case and in many other cases, we find that cities make great, ambitious plans and policies. India, in fact, has excellent policies on transport and, on other sort of sectors and development sectors. But those plans often don't translate on the ground in spirit and intent of those, policies and plans. And at least in the Indian context, there are, legacy, governance, capacity, finance issues, and barriers that are difficult to overcome. So how do you move across that, and how do you figure out ways in which, 3 ways or 2 ways in which cities can translate their plans into action? Are there any learnings there?
Well, I think there are 2 quite salient points that I would make here. The first is that if you analyze master plans from every city, to an extent, they all look the same. They roughly say the same thing. They have a similar format. Even the chapter headings are very similar. But when you analyze all of them put together, so now I've looked at many of them, there are many things in the master plan that actually do get delivered. And there are many things that don't. Right? And the dividing line between them, one of the dividing lines between them is that anything that could be cited as the responsibility of one agency, one government agency, usually has a much higher chance of getting done. Anything that requires the intervention of 2 or more agencies has a very high chance of failure. Right?
Right.
It's a consistent theme that analysis of urban development plans, master plans will tell you. What it's pointing to, this is one evidence point. There are many others as well to show that there is an institutional failure that results from too much fragmentation in the way cities are governed. I tell you that there's a common saying in India, as there is in much of the developing world, which had the colonial legacy, that we're burdened by the legacy that the British left us. Mm-hmm. The honest fact is the British haven't been stagnant in where they were in 1947 either. And that includes changes to governance, changes to the structure of agencies, the structure of their mandates and everything else. Transport for London is a great example of that. Right. We were only created in 2000 by combining 14 different public agencies. Now, you don't see that kind of activity happening in India. I mean, I can't even remember the last time that two agencies were merged in India. Mm-hmm. So the failure of governance is usually covered by coming up with special purpose vehicles who are given one discrete task. Metros are a great example of that. Every metro in India has been set up as a special purpose vehicle. And they're given one task, which is go build the metro.
Right.
So guess what? They go build the metro. And the metro ends up being integrated with nothing else. Right? The integration, even with the streetscape, is very poor. The integration with any other form of public transport is almost non-existent. But it's a striking thing, Jaya, that if you go to Mumbai, you look at you look at rail stations, you look at the new metro that is coming up, look at all of them. There is one place where you can walk out of a rail station directly into a big bus station. And that's the Chhatrapati Shivaji terminus. Right. So that thinking was around a century ago. But you don't find it in today's planning. Right. Now, if you get out of a rail station, what is the thing that you need the most? You need a form of distributing services. And in the absence of creating the space for integrating buses with rail, what you find, and Delhi is a great example of that, you come out of a metro station, what do you find? You find rickshaws all over the place. Right? This is where the breakdown of institutions is a real factor. And, this is not a criticism of what the metro has done, right? They were given a mandate and they fulfilled their mandate. The problem is not with the what the metro has done. The problem is with their mandate. And I think this is where what's been done in London to create an integrated transport organization is worth studying. I think so. That's one factor. But you asked for two, and you asked for other things, and I think the other factor is also very important, which is that for about 50 years, so more than 50 years, there's been a movement in the UK and in the US and in many European countries that you should not make big government decisions, especially decisions that very directly affect not everybody, but a small section of people, without their consultation. Right. So decision making has gone from being a very technocratic process to a very consultative process. It does make decision making much harder. It takes much longer to get projects done, but it results in projects that are more readily accepted. And I would suggest even higher quality projects as a result.
Absolutely.
Right. So now, again, when you compare this with what's happening in India, there is some consultation. It's not like it's non-existent, right? But it's very cursory. Because the decision is very much top-down. Somebody's decided that Pune is going to have a metro, and here's a corridor. Well, it's going to come up in that corridor no matter what anyone wants. So I think that consultative process is the other factor, the secret sauce. So institutional reform and integration, and making it really consultative with the people who are affected, are I think the two things I would point out.
But now just a tricky question here also, because you said, stakeholders, and stakeholders also involve things like businesses, private sectors, other people in the city. So when it comes to supply versus demand, how do we handle it? It's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, isn't it? My question is, how do you address such a conundrum? At the end of the day, whose responsibility is it to solve for issues pertaining to mobility in the city? And, maybe TfL has the example of where, the corporates probably came together and asked for this.
Well, look, incentive structures matter. If corporates have the right incentives, they will do the right thing. The incentives are very poor right now. People don't want to locate around metro lines because, frankly, the metro lines are not that useful right now. There's a single metro line that doesn't connect very many places, and that's why people are choosing to locate on the ring road and all that. I think in the case of London, and again, this is very instructive for not just for what the government needs to do, but what businesses and civil society need to do. The impetus for change in London in the 1980s did not come from the government. It came from major employers. So there are many employers who are footloose and can locate themselves anywhere, anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world, indeed, right?
Right.
And they are usually their interaction is more transactional, right? Tell me what you can give me, and I'll figure out whether I want to come and locate in London or Paris or Singapore or whatever.
Right.
But there are businesses who are grounded in London. So if you're Barclays Bank, well, with the best will in the world, you're stuck in London, right? If you're Goldman Sachs, it's a different story, because when you're looking for a European headquarter, you have a choice between London and Paris and Frankfurt and Zurich and all that. But Barclays doesn't have that choice. And so when you don't have that choice, you also don't have the choice to disengage with the whole process by which decision making is done. Right? So when I look at Bangalore, for example, there are, whether it's Infosys or Wipro or any number of companies of that kind, the fact is that they will have tens of thousands of employees rooted in Bangalore. Their future depends on Bangalore, and try as hard as they can, creating their own campuses and everything else. They cannot insulate themselves from the environment in which they exist. But I don't see major employers coming up with their own ideas about what they need, right? And so far, the level that I think we've reached is one where businesses think that by creating a hermetically sealed campus, which is all very beautiful, it looks like almost like a resort inside, that is enough to be able to get productivity. But the reality is very clear that people are commuting for extraordinarily long distances. Actually, more than distances, actually time. It's actually distances are not that long, but the time taken and the quality of that commute is miserable. And it's something which you cannot solve by creating a beautiful campus. You have to engage in the way the city works.
Absolutely. So I think it's come down to it's everybody's job to build a city, right? And these people can take the lead. Like you said, their interaction is transactional, and how do we benefit from that transactional nature? Because city, like you said, as a means, transport can be a means for building competitive cities. And at the end of the day, cities have to decide, what is their intention for building mass transit systems and, enabling basically seamless and frictionless sort of movement of labor. And that's what this is really meant to do. But it can go so much more above and beyond that to create these competitive cities.
I'll make a point. I'll make a point here that there's a danger here of cities surviving on laziness, right? And if you compare London and New York as two financial centers,
right,
and you look at the quality of infrastructure in the two cities, New York is not in a good state. There are shortcomings in London as well, but it's much better here. The difference is that in New York, you can afford to be lazy because America's money has nowhere to go. It will come to New York whether you like it or not. London doesn't have the advantage of that hinterland. And therefore, we have to offer a quality of life that attracts the talent and the businesses to come and locate here. When I look at cities in India, I think they think of themselves as New York. Whether it's Mumbai that thinks, where is India's money going to go apart from Mumbai? Well, the reality is it's going to Singapore. So India's money is being managed by Indians living in Singapore, not in Mumbai. And that's a real challenge. It's a challenge on many fronts for the economy. And likewise, Bangalore has been lazy for a long time. Where's tech money going to go? Well, it has nowhere to go, so it's going to carry on coming to Bangalore. And that's fine, so you can be competitive in India. Although Hyderabad gives, good competition to Bangalore.
Yeah.
But you can afford to be lazy and still be competitive in India. But are we really exploiting the full potential of what Bangalore can do?
Absolutely.
Right? It's not a globally competitive city apart from the low cost. And I think that's where there's a need to uplift the thinking and challenge ourselves on not just what we're facing today, but how do we build cities of the future that can enable the country to become more productive I will say this, the sort of productivity improvement that can come from urbanization is one of those very rare instruments to improve productivity, which has to be exploited properly.
Absolutely. And I think exactly this, creating cities which can be competitive and livable, for their residents, but also competitive for businesses, and then stand an edge in the world. And you're right about Bangalore, about many other Indian cities, that, we need to not get complacent. We need to do much better. We need to ensure that we are giving our citizens the quality and our businesses the quality of lives they deserve, that they're asking for, to remain, viable and thriving. So with this, we've come to the end of the chat. Shashi, thank you so much for that insightful conversation. Congratulations on the fantastic work that you've done on urban transformation, and good luck to you for making many more strides. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jaya.